Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. Yes, they did. They absolutely got it totally correct in so many different ways as we are seeing played out in the present. And this is Tom Navolis, your host, and you can find all the information about Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists Got It Right at our archive website, which is samueladamsreturns.net. And that also has a link to samueladamsreturns.com, and you can actually sign up for the promotions that come out about the programs and anything else that Sam Adams is doing throughout the calendar year. In addition to that, you can go on to samueladamsreturns.com and you can sign up for the seminars that we are doing on our books. So go take a look at what all is there. And definitely, we're getting a lot of good reports back on the newest book that I have out, From Covenant to the Present Constitution, as a workbook. So check it out. And I do want to give you a little bit of update about last weekend, in that we were at, or I should say, Kathy and I were there, and Mr. Adams then made his appearance at the Ohio Federation of Republican Women. It was just a really fantastic time. We enjoyed it. We had a couple sessions where the ladies were able to interact with Samuel Adams, and the feedback that I've gotten from that as well has been just absolutely fantastic. With that, there were a couple of things that were asked, and I kind of want to talk about them a little bit on today's program, and one in particular. And the one in particular is the question that was asked in basically both sessions. I asked them, or Mr. Adams asked them, the question that if you were able to interact with one of the founding fathers, such as myself, being Samuel Adams, what is your interest? What is it that really is important to you? And it was interesting to hear their question being, is the Constitution still relevant into the future in respect to what I would think, or in their case, in the present day? And what did I consider, as Samuel Adams, the most critical aspect of operationally putting the Constitution into force? Good questions. I mean, that was really good. The simple answer, and we'll discuss the in depth a little bit more, a portion of the answer. The simple answer is yes, the Constitution as it was developed and put into implementation in 89, and then as amended into the 1890s, is timeless, And I'm going to tell you why just here in a little bit, because James Madison indicates that it's timeless. And we're going to talk about that from the point of the arguments in the Constitution Convention, especially when it came to the time of suffrage being giving the vote, who can give the vote. And then the other aspect that was absolutely important to Mr. Adams in particular was, and even James Madison and many others, is that we would have moral and virtuous leaders elected into office and representing the people, such that we would have good and just laws. But as I explained to the ladies, or as Sam Adams explained to the ladies, the expectation of the Federalist was, as I always say in this program, the expectation of the Federalists is that the churches would continue to do their jobs, coming out of the Great Awakening, moving through the Revolution, and having such a strong faith-based environment that it was clear from Madison's statement as well as John Adams' statement that this Constitution is only good for a moral and virtuous people. Well, you can't have a moral and virtuous people unless they understand morality and virtue, and it has to be in the context of what was understood today as none other than that biblical Reformation understanding of morality and virtue. So if you don't have that, and if the society does not have that, then it takes and it breaks down, as we saw before the Great Awakening and we saw after the 1830s or into the 1830s. As a matter of fact, we started seeing things happening in the 1820s. No different why Stansbury then had to take and write not only about the Constitution and do the catechism on the Constitution, but he also had to talk about morality in the very preface of it. So something that Sam Adams had to say, all the papers I have in front of me, as he was writing to his wife in the end relative to elections, and here we are in the midterms, and just a few. Early voting's already started, which frustrates me because I don't believe in early voting. I do believe that people can and should take and get their absentee ballots if they cannot get to the polls, or in those communist states like Washington and Oregon, where they went away from going to the polls and only have mail-in ballots. I just think that early voting, which we do have in Ohio, I can go to the elections office and vote there. I just don't think that should happen. It makes it convenient. It makes it convenient for those that want to manipulate the system. But without taking and doing a whole program on that, because I do want to talk about voting from Madison's perspective and the timelessness of the Constitution. But with that, Sam Adams was taking and he was writing an article in the Boston Gazette, and this was in 1781. So this was during the Articles of Confederation and such, but he was talking in reference to the Massachusetts election cycle of that time. And one of the things that he has to say here is that I was sorry to hear that the number of votes returned the last time did not amount to a quarter of the number of qualified electors in the Commonwealth. Ladies and gentlemen, that is such a sad commentary about elections, but we have seen that over and over and over again in midterm elections in particular. We see that a lot in the presidential election cycle, but we especially see that low voter turnout. Well, my expectation for this 2018 election is that we're going to have pretty good voter turnout. I don't know. I can't predict. I'm not smart enough to do that. But I believe from what we're seeing and the things that we know that are going on, and that the Democrats in particular are showing their evil hand to such an extent that hopefully many people will get out and vote and help get others out to vote, and vote in a manner that is going to maintain and retain our liberties as a constitutional republic, and have the ability to enforce then what it means to govern within that framework. To that, I want to talk a little bit about the timelessness of the Constitution and the fact that voting was something that became very contentious in August 7th in particular. There was a discussion about voting and suffrage, as it was termed at that time, earlier in the convention in July, but it really came to fruition to its depth of argument, if you will, on August 7th, and then even a little bit afterwards. And I'm not going to get into that as much as I want to get into what Madison had to say about it, both in 1821 as he reflected on that convention, and again in 1829 as he reflected on everything that was happening over that period of time. Do the math, and I'll help you with the math as we get into the program a little bit more. Is just do the math between 1829 and when the Constitution went into effect in 1789. Simple math. I'm sure that you can do it. I know you can. So, with that, I wanted to do something a little bit different in bringing you into a little context of what was going on the timelessness of the period. So let's just drop into this whole idea that even before the Constitution was put into place, well, actually, after it, some of the things that happened. Did you know that in May 17th, 1792, the beginning of the New York Stock Exchange is established with the signing of the Buttonwood Agreement? Wow, wait a minute. Stock exchange. Oh no. Wait a minute. That has something to do with commerce. That has something to do with business. It has something to do with stocks. Do the math. 1792. Constitution went into effect in 1789. The amendments were in effect by 1792. Our Bill of Rights was being established, has been established. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a New York Stock Exchange. Do we have a little commerce type stuff happening here? Anyway, let's think about this one. Healthcare. In 1793, Dr. Benjamin Rush confers with two Philadelphia doctors about an epidemic of disease along the docks of Philadelphia over the preceding 2 weeks. By November, over 10% of the population of the city had succumbed. That means they died. Nearly 5,000 people died. The disease had been brought to the city by refugees from Haiti, then coupled with a wet spring and swamps that became an incubator of mosquitoes, or for mosquitoes. Geez, what happened there? Malaria, do you think? Yeah, remember, a lot of our cities, especially on the eastern shore, were nothing but swamps and breeding places for disease. All right, we got 5 minutes left here. So here's another one. Talk about economy, talk about business, talk about invention, talk about entrepreneurship. 1794, Eli Whitney patents the cotton gin, which could do the work of 50 men when cleaning cotton by hand. Oh my, we're down to our last 2 minutes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, in 1820, now we just skipped, we changed a little bit on the century. Had to prove, get this, to prove that a tomato is not poisonous, Colonel Robert Gibson Johnson eats one in public in Salem, New Jersey. Wow. Did you know that, we were not eating tomatoes in America until 1820. That's like a major staple for all of you vegetarians and salad buffs out there, right? Is tomatoes, tomato soup, ketchup, tomato paste. Where would Italy be all about? What would the Italians do without a tomato paste, eh? And so on and so forth we go. Ladies and gentlemen, as we get ready to come back into that next segment here, it is a fact that when the founders were arguing about how we govern and what form of government do we want to have, and I'm going to give you a couple other fun facts here when we get back, is that they understood manufacturing, they understood banking, they understood commerce, they understood healthcare, they understood every aspect of what we deal with today. We just do it a little differently. We just do it a little bit because we have more insights into God's universe. And we have those insights given by God in such a way that we're able to expand upon the technologies. But governance and government has to be stable. And that's exactly what was being looked for in how to govern. Not only in the states' constitutions, but also what did it mean in a form of a national government by which then we would have credibility on the world stage. So Sam Adams had it pegged. And when he comes back, or should I say myself, Tom Navolis, comes back for our second segment, here when Samuel Adams returns and those anti-federalists got it right. We'll see you in a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, yes, they did. They absolutely got it right. And I have to say, once again, my primary program host, if you will, is with Liberty Works Radio Network. Check them out. I sure enjoy being on Liberty Works Radio Network. And not only that, I look forward to opportunity on being on some of the other networks that are out there and taking on types of educational material that I have to present. So I'm looking forward to being able to announce those other networks as those opportunities come along. If you want a little bit more information about Samuel Adams Returns, go to the archive page at samueladamsreturns.net. You can find an email there on that home page. You can find my 2 books available there, as well as audios and videos relative to the archives. And that'll then take you to samueladamsreturns.com, where you can schedule up for seminars as well. We were talking in the last segment about the timelessness of the Constitution, and that those that framed it, even those that were against it initially, knew that once you had a solid form of government put into place, that it would be something that was necessary for all the activities that we have been talking about from the last segment: commerce, banking, farming, all of that. And then how do you protect it within voting? And I was given a couple little fun facts relative to a timeline in history. So go to the archives to listen to the whole program, and you'll get the beginning of those fun facts. But one of them was the fun fact that it wasn't until 1820 were we eating tomatoes in America. And that was by a Colonel Robert Gibbon Johnson. So from the first segment, it wasn't Gibson, it was Gibbon Johnson. And he ate a tomato. And this is one of my last little, it's small because it's freezing cold. And these are one of the last guys I got off the vine because we got our first frost here last night. And well, I'm glad I captured this little guy yesterday. But you know what? Here it is, a nice little homegrown tomato. And we didn't start eating them until 1820. So 1820, 1920. Man, that's like 200 years ago that we only started eating tomatoes. Kath is looking at me and going, holy smokes. Anyway, enough about that. So, timelessness of the Constitution as it went into the debates. And we're hearing the communists, that being the Democrats, taking and saying, get rid of the Electoral College, get rid of the Electoral College. Well, here's something that happened. So do your math, okay? The Constitution went into effect in when? 1789 is when it was ratified. And then we had our amendments that took us up into, what did we get into? Somewhere around 1790-ish. Now here in 1824, the Electoral College and the process established within the context of none other than the Constitution would not work this way again until we saw the coup that happened in the 70s. I'll let you figure that out. It's in the book. It's in my seminars. But here's what happened. 1824 is when the Electoral College vote yielded no majority. So even then, the Electoral College yielded no majority. John Quincy Adams would be elected president by the House of Representatives on February 9th, 1825, outpolling fellow Democrat Republicans. Remember, they weren't Democrats and Republicans. The party of Jefferson was called the Democrat-Republican Party because they really understood what that meant instead of the Democrats and the Republicans, which we have today. And now, now a loose coalition of competing factions, including Andrew Jackson, who had actually received a higher number of electoral college votes, 99, than Adams, 84. It was not a majority due to votes for Henry Clay, which was 37, and William Crawford, which was 41. In the first election with popular votes, okay? So up until this election, popular vote was never a part of it. Popular vote, the votes were always cast within the context of the state, which elected electors to the Electoral College. That's how it's supposed to work. But there was a change within the system to allow a popular election that would elect the electors. And it was not at that time until the changes in just the last century that made it that the electoral college was, the largest number, the guy or the person who got the most popular vote got all the electoral votes. That is bogus. That is a false way of doing it. That is the manipulated way of the Democrats and the oligarchs to subvert the Constitution. And the way of taking away our constitutional republic is to try and destroy the Electoral College. It has a reason. I'll do another program someday, maybe, on the Electoral College, but there's a lot of information out there. But with that, this is the first election with popular votes. Adams garnered less votes there as well, with 105,321 to 155,872 to Jackson's. So Hillary Clinton shut the front door. I mean, shut up. The popular vote, the Electoral College, ladies and gentlemen, is there to protect this constitutional republic. Okay? Get that straight. And then when there is confusion or a no majority within the Electoral College, then it goes to the House of Representatives and they battle it out there. So that's interesting. And I consumed a lot of time on that, but it's very, very critical. But it means that, once again, in establishing the fact of an Electoral College, that the Constitution is timeless to protect the republic. Commerce. Oh my, we have to deal with commerce again. Those people back then, they had no idea about commerce. They had nothing going on in that. Well, how about this? In October 26, 1825, the use of the Erie Canal began in Buffalo, New York, with the first boat departing for New York City. This opened up the Great Lakes region by cutting the travel time between the two cities 1/3 and shipping costs by 9/10. Wow, that 9/10 is like way bigger than Elizabeth Warren's FUPA, or was that Pocahontas or Pocahontas or whatever it is. Anyway, 9/10 compared to 1 in 1,000 and something. Anyhow, it meant something here in commerce. Cost of the canal was $7 million to build it at that time. It's a big chunk of change when you start comparing to $1,825. But on November 4th, 1825, the first boat navigating the Erie Canal arrived in New York City. The opening of the Erie Canal contributed to making the city of New York a chief Atlantic port, as if it wasn't that already. So that's amazing, just absolutely amazing. So the timelessness on how all of these things function, and I could go on and on from the 1700s all the way through into the first numbers of years. Wow. You think that we needed a form of governance. Yes, within the context of the state constitutions as well as in the individual republics of the states. Remember that they're the republics of the states. And Kath just told me I have 5 minutes. Boy, we need 5 hours, don't we, to get through all of this stuff. Anyway, let's get on it. So Madison actually had to go back and do some reflection as to what he said in his notes and what he said during the debates in 1787 on August 7th. I'm going to try and get there because I think that's all important as he lays out the whole aspects of commerce, how he lays out all of the different changes. But I think the one that once again looks at the timelessness as we look at another decade shift of what Madison was referring to back in 87 relative to suffrage, as well as it was a number of the others. There was you had Jerry, you had Gouverneur Morris, you had a number that were arguing that it should be only the freeholders, that means people of property, that would have the vote. But then as those arguments went back and forth, it was, well, wait a minute, all those that fought in the war, those that were working for mechanics, those that were taking and working in the shipyards, those that were renting, if you will, those that did not own property in the term of having land ownership. Oh, wait a minute, they fought in the war. They needed to be represented, no different than anybody else. They needed to participate in the laws which were going to be formed. That's the idea of a republic over just a generalized democracy, which Madison rejects in his writings, as well as so many others do. So the Democrat, Socialist, Communist are liars because they are lying about our history. They are lying about the whole fact that the Constitution is some kind of moving target, a dynamic document. No, that's not what Madison even talked about in here, because he talked about what we need to address from a societal basis and everything like that. But, all right, we're down to our last 3 minutes in this segment, ladies and gentlemen, so I will take and move into high-speed talk. Not really. I'm not going to do that to you. No, what he talks about here in this letter in 1829 is that the right of suffrage or voting being the vital importance and approving an extension of it to housekeepers and heads of families, I will suggest a few considerations which govern my judgment on this subject. So here it is. You have Monroe that was president. Now you have a whole, shift in what was going on in a presidency. And here's Madison still having a commentary on that. So we have to look at what we already did, is that during this period, the Constitution was now in effect. Here's the answer to the math problem that we talked about earlier, for 40 years. Okay, for 40 years. The discussion during the Convention of State in 87 was highly charged in respect to who should have a right to vote, as well as a clear insight that the nation would expand in population, commerce, manufacturing, and property acquisition. So, ladies and gentlemen, as Madison takes and moves on, he is talking about these new, and especially what has come about in those that are housekeepers, not about the women vote just yet, but that was a consideration, housekeepers and heads of families. And those are those people that were engaged, and as he talks about this, were engaged in manufacturing, they were engaged in commerce, a number of those various areas that we were talking about, and they did not necessarily own land. How do we deal with this whole idea of protecting their rights within the form of government without also impacting the rights of those that own property? Exactly what we have going on today. Exactly what I had been talking about in a couple of the other programs relative to what the heck goes on with levies. What goes on, especially with school levies, where there are places where majorities do not own property, they live in apartments they rent. Wow. That is something that Madison is talking about and having consideration, and how do you protect the rights of both parties? So when we come back into the next and final segment, we're going to look at some more what Madison is going to be discussing here, and I'm going to preface it with the consideration around levies. And Sam Adams, he was always right in what he had to say because you know what? He was an anti-federalist, and those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And come on back to SamuelAdamsReturns.net when you get that chance. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, yes, they did. They got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host, and I'm so delighted that, here we are. And you may be very delighted that we're in the third segment here already. But I hope you're wanting to hang out a little bit longer and we can go for the next 5 hours. I know Dick, my producer over at Liberty Works Radio Network, he'd be going, 5 hours of you? Are you kidding me? I don't know. But anyway, yes, you can, if you haven't, listen to the program every Saturday, either at 9 o'clock a.m. or at 7 p.m. You can get it on the internet at lwrn.net. Check out the other stuff that's going on there as well. So Madison, we were talking about the timelessness of the Constitution and where we are right now, because as we heard in the other segment, that Sam Adams, he was so disappointed back in, my goodness gracious, 1781. And now we're talking about this letter by Madison in 1829. And Sam Adams was saying that he was sorry to hear that the number of votes returned the last time did not amount to 1/4 the number of qualified electors in the Commonwealth. That's like, folks, where were you when it was necessary to show up to vote? And even there in Massachusetts, it was that somebody that probably should not have gotten elected got elected. And it's like, if you can't get the vote out, then you have to suffer the consequences of the election until the next opportunity. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you right now, if the Democrats get back in office here in 2018, you better really, really, really watch what'll ever happen to the ballot box. Because I'm afraid without the president taking and vetoing everything that would come out of Congress under a Democrat-run Congress, that it just would be excruciating. And then the question would be, would we ever have a vote again? I don't know. I don't trust them because they are communists. Look here in Ohio. So I got to distract a little bit as far as how important the vote is. If you look here in Ohio, they have come out very clearly and very distinctly. I've talked about this organization. Again, I'm not wearing a tinfoil hat, okay? It's called Communist Party USA. They've been around for a long time, and they've been influencing and infiltrating all the way around. They got into universities. That's why you get this Antifa and all this other stuff. But not only that, they have come out 100% in favor of Mr. Cordray, Cordray, who is running for the governorship here in Ohio. The guy's a flaming Obama communist. Everybody knows it. Well, maybe not everybody, because he's going to have a lot of idiots voting for him, people that are uneducated, people that are so swayed, which is exactly what James Madison and the others were talking about and arguing about, is the fact that you would have money interest and you would have those outside the ideals of truth relative to what was necessary to have an informed electorate that could vote in a manner that would be moral and virtuous for what is absolutely necessary in governing, and have justice, not social justice and the economic justice and all of these other whiny crybaby communists. They're all communists. Okay, back it down a little bit, Tommy. We'll say a little bit on the socialist, because well, it's all about the same thing, because they're all derivatives out of Fabianism and so on and so forth. They're all out of, we can go back historically. They're just evil, okay? That's what it is. No, off track a little bit. So anyway, he was talking about, getting back to Madison in this letter, and he is talking about it is a law of nature now well understood that the earth under a civilized cultivation is capable of yielding substance for a large surplus of consumers beyond those having an immediate interest in the soil. A surplus which must increase with the increasing improvements in agriculture and labor-saving arts applied to it. And it is a lot of humanity. It is a lot. I mean, it is something. It's a substance. It's a fundamental concept of humanity. That of this surplus, a large proportion is necessarily reduced by a competition for employment to wages which afford them the bare necessities of life. The proportion being without property or the hope of acquiring it cannot be expected to sympathize sufficiently with its rights to be safe dispositories of the power over them. So what he's talking about here is that whole consideration that, you know what, agriculture is really important. And it wasn't the fact that we were just an agrarian institution in the United States or an agrarian nation. No, what he was saying, we were also a manufacturing nation. What you heard earlier was we were seeing the industry was going. I can talk about what was happening in the 1820s and that steamboats were getting, yes, they were getting their licenses. Steamboats were actually functioning and working. And did you know that it was in the 1800s here in the United States that a patent was made for a gasoline engine, or as it was called, a vapor engine? My goodness gracious. That was interesting. Wait a minute. They must have discovered oil? Or they discovered, how were they doing that? Where did that come from, that they had a capacity to do a gasoline engine? Well, we had steam engines, we had commerce, we had all these things going on, and we had people that were working, and we had it making it easier because now we were having implements. You know what? It wasn't just the mules and the donkeys that were taking and plowing the fields. They were coming up with steam-driven tractors. Come on, people. Let's learn a little history and understand the timelessness of the functionality and operation of the Constitution to have a definitive form of governance, not only on a national basis, because that's where our interstate and intrastate trade came about, but also international trade, and to what that meant from the constitutions of the independent republics within then the greater federal Constitution of the United States. So when you start throwing out and you're coming against the national Constitution, that Constitution that everybody talks about, everybody forgets about the states' constitutions over here. Yeah, on that blank wall where I'm still waiting for my law degree. But anyway, you got the states' constitutions over here as well. And the point of that being, if you throw out the national Constitution and you destroy it, you know what? We've already been destroying the states' constitutions, and they don't mean anything anymore. And now you can have a consolidated socialist, communist government dictatorship over you. You know, that also comes from the perspective of the vote. So anyway, what do we do is what Madison started about this unfavored class of community. In so many different ways, agriculture wasn't so unfavored because they were landholders, property holders. They were called the freeholders. But what do you do with housekeepers? What do you do about all those other folks and the heads of families and so on and so forth? So, you know what? It becomes very interesting as to, that's what Madison was asking. He's going, what do you do about that? How do you make sure that you have a full share of political power? You have to recollect, you have to understand, it cannot be expedient in such a way to rest a Republican government on a portion of the society having a numerical and physical force excluded from and liable to be turned against it. So, you know, if you're exclusionary, except for illegals, we can talk about that. The illegals and immigrants, those being whatever you want, green carders, they have no right to vote because they pervert the system, period. But we're talking about people that are citizens, okay? So this was something they had to deal with. This is a view. It's very subjective, but you have to take and embrace the whole idea that every citizen, every description of citizen has a sufficient state in the public order and a stable administration of laws, particularly in the housekeepers and heads of families, most of whom having given hostages to fortune. Hostages to fortune means that some became indentured servants, some actually as a hostage. Hostage to fortune was when we were starting to see all these different factories coming into effect, and people were taking, and it was like, what, understandably we had to put in some labor laws because these folks were getting so taken advantage of. Is that slavery was not something that was still existent just in the southern states. It was something that was happening in the northern states within the manufacturing environment. So how do you take care of society? How do you take care of those others that are disadvantaged or becoming a majority who, if they had the ability, which they did, the ability to vote, they could take it over from the freeholders, the property owners, the property holders? How do you balance that? And that was the conversation that was happening. And Madison was talking about this. As you know, all of this, and I'm going to put things in a PDF format so you have them, or they are in the PDF format at samueladamsreturns.net in the archive for today's program. So one of the things that we saw is that in 1820, the population in America continued to rise. The 1820 census includes 9,638,453 people living in the United States. That's 33% more than the 1810 census. And, the most populated state was New York with over 1.3 million people in it. Now, in this writing that Madison was doing, he said, look at this ratio of increase in the United States. He was talking about in 1829, so 9 years after the census, we're talking about 12 million people in America in about that next 9-year growth period. In 25 years, he projected 24 million people in America. And then he takes it and he moves it in those increments of 25, and he doubles the population of the United States every 25 years. So in 50 years, there'd be 48 million. In 75 years, there'd be 96 million. In 100 years, he said, so now we're talking about 1929, there'd be 192 million people in America. So you have to look at that, then what he was looking at, and the correlation and respecting the whole idea of what happens with these ratios in relationship to agriculture, and then in relationship to the property distribution amongst the people, because now people have the ability, by being part of manufacturing, having jobs, and how property is now going to be distributed in such an ability that every Joe Blow, hello, my name's Tom Blow. No, it's not Tom Blow, it's Tom Novolis. That's it. Tom Novolis can go out and buy a house. And so can you, if you can afford it, until you can't afford it anymore because of the levies. And so a lot of the levies, especially the school levies, and I want to wrap it up with this, is guess what? It is the non-property holders in many, 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 many communities that do it for the children. And therefore, they take and increase the property taxes to support all of these different taxing authorities and taxing subdivisions, as they are called, within your state, within your counties, within your communities, that they are not property holders, but they have a right to vote, but they're uneducated. That's how Madison wraps this whole thing up. He wraps this up in that we need to have a moral and virtuous electorate. We're not getting that in our educational system, even though we're paying 49 to 51% of our tax dollars here in Geauga County goes to education. We're not getting a moral and virtuous people. We're not getting a moral and virtuous electorate. So they're really stupid and they vote against everybody. So many that do vote for it it then becomes that self-inflicted eviction. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're down to our last few seconds. I want you to go out and start understanding what it means to be a moral and virtuous person and an educated electorate as we're moving into, and early voting is happening right now for this 2018 election. And don't be what Sam Adams was frustrated with in that 25%. Get out there. Help others understand that they can vote, that they should vote, and help them understand and educate them in what it means to vote. Because you know what? The Anti-Federalists, they got it right. And Sam Adams with those Anti-Federalists are going to return next week. Here, Sam Adams returns.